Hey guys, welcome back to another Founder Sessions with Nomad Financial. I'm Jonathan Goss, the founder and CEO of Nomad Financial. This week we have our guest Greg on. Greg, why don't you give yourself an introduction to the audience here?
Absolutely. I'm Greg Castro. I am a co-founder and CEO of Varick North, which is a full-service marketing agency for high-growth companies.
So you imagine the conversation we want to have today is about growth, about sales, marketing, all the elements of growth, and particularly how they connect, I think, to finance is always important, right? And numbers tracking and what it means for a business. Before you go too far into this already, let's give a shout out to Nam, the man behind the camera over here. He prefers it that way. He's giggling at himself right now, but Nam, thanks again. Without you, this isn't happening. So for any folks who have questions, he'll be the one making sure that we get to them. In the meantime, Greg, let's dive deep on the sales and marketing side. So let's first start, let's give a framework. What companies do you work with? What's the kind of size and scope of those companies?
Yeah, so we work with everyone from really startups to Fortune 500s. And what we do is we take and we build very scalable solutions. And what I mean by that is we take a very goal-oriented, metric-driven approach, so a top-down approach, and we kind of reverse engineer, the tactics that we use on both the marketing and sales fronts based on the company's goals.
Got it. Okay. And knowing that, is there a point in time in which a company should really start thinking about using your service?
So we work with everyone from just a one-person team all the way up to the scaled out startup to the Fortune 500 who has hundreds of team members themselves. When it really comes is at the different points when we engage with the company, it comes down to where they're at. There's either, generally speaking, from a sales front, you have a founder-driven sale, you have that first sales hire, or then what you have is a disorganized team. And it's a lot easier to engage when you're just starting to build that foundation because we're not breaking as many processes that ultimately go into it. There are less moving pieces. And as you get larger on that scale, there's more processes, people, and components that you have to reorganize, jigger, and put into place again, ultimately to get the value of building that scalable foundation.
So let's think about in building a scalable foundation, there's a number of pieces that intersect. What are those pieces? How do they work? And what does a good organization look like? And what are some of the mistakes that you see from companies that are avoidable that they should be thoughtful about it in advance?
Yeah, so actually, to describe marketing and sales, I use a finance term, which is really funny. And I've never really heard a lot of other agencies, marketing people use this before. But I talk about it as the aggregation of marginal gains. Right? And so this is something that, investment advisors often talk about, companies look at here. But from a marketing and sales standpoint, it's about an aggregation of services, of tactics that are all building on top of each other. And by getting, 1x return here, 2x return here, 10% increase over here, ultimately adds up to a substantial number to your bottom line. And so what I think a lot of companies they do is they silo their marketing and sales efforts. And they ultimately try and connect them at the top. And that's a big problem because marketing and sales, they're really, both ends of the funnel. Marketing is top of the funnel, filling it. Sales is about closing the bottom of the funnel. And then once they're in the funnel, there's a number of different components there that it's really important for everyone to communicate and talk through. And so I think that's the biggest mistake I see companies making. And by the time that they can make any actionable change, it's either delayed, too late, or the value has already escaped from there. And so most companies, when we actually talk about building that foundation, it's also breaking down the walls between the internal company, their backbone, which is the strategy behind everything, how they're ultimately going to sell the product, and then how they reach the customer.
Got it. Okay. And so, let's start on the one side of that. Marketing. Is there a certain size in which a company really comes and starts looking to you guys or internally to really start spending money on marketing? How does that scale over time, or how does that change over time?
Yeah, so the first component, a lot of companies come to us when they're also first trying to build a marketing strategy. They've dabbled in a few different components here. They've maybe tried some performance advertising, putting some, $100 on Facebook, $200 on Google. They've tried to write some content. But really where it comes into play is where they're actually looking at talking about the entire marketing mix and implementing that. So that's one time that companies come to us and we actually build out a really, base foundation of what they want to do. Okay. Because with marketing, just like financials, I can't come to you and say, hey, I only want to focus on my financials one day of the year and that's the only time I want to come to you. It's the same type of concept where you have to keep a good book going month over month in order for, the end product to be clean, to be right.
Is there, and on that, is there a point where you actually tell somebody, you're probably still too early to work with us? Is it about product? Is it, where are they, is it where they aren't funding, if they're venture backed? What do you look for there?
So when we actually kind of look at the components where they might be too early to work with us, it comes down to two things. Do they have something to sell?
Yeah.
And if they do, what are their ultimate goals? And if their goals aren't actually fixed by brand awareness, the marketing component, the sales components, then we tell them it's too early to work with us. We don't work with every company who comes because ultimately, like I said, we like to help companies hit their goals. And so a lot of companies tell us their goals and then they tell us what they want to do from a marketing and sales standpoint. And because of our experience, they don't exactly align. And if we're not ultimately helping them reach there, there's no value. So we would tell a company, if their goals don't ultimately align with the tactics, we shouldn't work with them at this point.
Got it. And now if you connect marketing, you're generating leads into the business to sales. Are you relying on a piece of software to do that? Is it early on? Are people can you do it manually? What does it require from the business? And what's a best-in-class process there?
Yeah, so when you're talking about connecting your marketing and sales team, even if it's just one or two people at that component, it really comes down to some of the technological components that facilitate those things. People use systems like Slack for communication. CRM systems are a really powerful tool. We ultimately implement those for a lot of our clients because it gives transparency, not only from the marketing side and feeding in those leads, but also tracking from the sales side. And for the marketing side to ultimately understand how powerful that lead is, if it's a good lead and if the company's closing it. Because really what happens with the most companies there is that, this is why Veric North was founded too, was that there were so many agencies who would send companies leads. They would be getting thousands of the leads. They'd qualify them from a qualitative standpoint. Do they check the boxes? And then the company wouldn't close the leads. And they'd look back at the marketing firm and they'd say, hey, you're sending us really bad leads. And the marketing company would be like, no, we're sending great leads. We've qualified them. And what would happen was then the company would get mad at the marketing firm couldn't really do anything there, and they'd both get no value out of the equation. And so what we did was we looked at helping them through that process. Once they hand off the lead, a lot of the times it was the company's sales process. Sales is the first thing that's pretty tangible to most people. We grow up selling, we sell ourselves every day. Maybe contracts aren't signed, maybe money isn't exchanging hands, but it's the same thing. So people think they can tackle it, but in a lot of consultative sale processes, by putting in those steps into place, you can increase your odds. And so that's what we start to focus on. And that's really where a lot of companies also see that increased value in their marketing efforts, following through.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any numbers that people should target in terms of either on the marketing side or on the sales side that you say, this is a healthy company, they're doing something the right way?
Yeah. So there's a couple of components, and metrics is the buzzword nowadays. Everyone's looking at what metrics should I be doing, what standard KPIs, and my answer to that is there are no standard KPIs that apply to every company. You take your goals, you take what metrics are measurable, actionable information come out of those metrics, and then you focus on them that ultimately can help your end result. So for example, if a company's looking at, let's say it's a SaaS platform. There are a lot of SaaS platforms on the digital advertising component because it's also numbers in, numbers out. If we can spend X to acquire a customer, we know exactly what they'll pay month over month, and we can tell you what the LTV of that customer is for 1 month. And then so we look at, all right, what is our customer acquisition cost on those channels? Ultimately, is that number greater? At what point do we break even in terms of that customer relationship there? And then what are the influencing factors behind that as well? So it might be, is there a brand lift that goes into it? Is our organic search rankings going up, targeting these individual types of components? So what I really say when it comes down to metrics is break down your company goals. Decide what metrics equate to those goals, and then those are the metrics you track.
Yeah.
The biggest other component to that is that, there are such things as bad metrics. People think having all this wealth of information is really good, but ultimately it really comes down to, can you get actionable insights out of those metrics? And if you can, then it's a good metric. If the metric doesn't tell you anything, there's no point in following it.
You got it. And do you, even on some of those, the math you're talking about earlier, which, we work with a lot of, right? You're talking LTVs versus CPAs, the lifetime value of a customer versus the cost of acquisition, right? Are you looking for a ratio there that says this is healthy, or even then it really depends on the business?
So there are healthy ratios. I mean, if you're just looking at a really lean business who's producing cash, who isn't focused on market acquisition and is more focused about what their potential market size is and showing traction, then the ratio doesn't matter as much as long as basically the CPA or the cost per acquisition is ultimately going to be lower than what the LTV is. That margin there depends on what the company's comfortable with and what stage they're in. But generally speaking, I mean, in business, at the end of the day, if you can have a 20 to 30% margin minimally, upwards of 50%, those are amazing.
Yeah. And you're talking about the 20-30% is net of COGS, net of
course, bottom line,
pure bottom line,
bottom line.
So when you're doing the math on your acquisitions, if this is the business you're going to build, and you're not purposely spending marketing to build a moat or where there's true benefits of scale, which is rare, then you need to make sure you're building in that margin to be a healthy business. That you're going to make money in the future. You're making money now with this,
exactly,
with the marketing dollars you're spending. No, that's great to know. I'm going to segment a little bit out of marketing and sales here. Although if there's anything you think you'd really want to share with founders, please do. But I would say, as a founder, right, you wear many hats, right? You've been running this company for a few years. What general advice would you give to other founders out there? What are the areas where you think people don't spend enough time or do spend too much time? That could be prohibitive to their success.
That's a good question, because it's something I think that I'm constantly tackling day in and day out, and you're constantly learning about yourself as a founder. As you know, when you're a founder, your problems don't go away when you go home. That's the biggest difference, is you come back the next day and they're generally larger. So I found that a couple principles ultimately really helped me as I was growing Veric North and figuring things out. The first being is focusing on my strengths and delegating my weaknesses. I think that comes with this other component, which is operational transparency in terms of your internal team themselves. There are things that I am amazing at internally, and there are things that I am absolutely terrible with, whether it's from a bandwidth standpoint, whether it is from just a pure focus standpoint. And being transparent with the team on those and getting the help where I need it ultimately is one of the things that it took me a while to get caught up with. And I'm now able to master my time better and spending it on things that really, create value for my business, rather than ultimately things that can be done by someone else and free me up to create more value in areas that I'm stronger at. So I think that's one component.
So it energizes you more by being able to focus, and that level of energy you get to put into the things you do best. It becomes a kind of a reinforcement of itself.
Exactly.
And how you're going to perform. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's a huge aspect. From my example, I hate the nuances of grammar and from proposal standpoint. So every time I'm creating a new proposal,
can you guys tell how he feels about grammar already?
That's not fair. Listen, I have the premium membership on Grammarly. Great software. I'd highly recommend it for any founders out there. It's saved myself a ton on emails.
First software plug of the day, I've discovered how little I know about comma placements. And also, when they've had articles come out telling everybody about the email quality, the average email quality in corporate America. I'm not even going to mention startups, but in corporate America and how we all write at a 5th grade level.
Yeah.
And now you see this in Grammarly, and it's confirmed. We're
I get my weekly report, and there's two main components. You write 99% more than all of Grammarly users. Great. You use X percentage of words that are more unique, and I'm like, awesome. You are in the 1 percentile of people who make all of these mistakes. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, that's how they end it. But it's a great platform. Ultimately, it saves a lot.
Yeah. And one other thing I think that comes up a lot with delegation and hiring people to reinforce your weaknesses, to have a strong team, is really emotionally stepping away from it. Yes. Right? There's one thing to allow someone else to own it and giving them that ownership, but making sure that they don't feel that they still have to keep coming to you for final approval. That even if you believe that they're not going to do it as well as you would if you put all your time and energy into it, because it's your baby and because it's your company and you've figured this out over time, them at 80% is still better off than you coming in and beating them down with feedback that is unnecessary and trying to achieve this level of perfection you can never do.
Yeah. So that was a huge focus area and definitely a learning curve when I first started out. Figuring out not only how to delegate those tasks, but also how to coach effectively on those tasks. Because with a founder, we're limited with our time. When you're wearing so many different hats, I don't care where you are. If you can't find something to do in your own company, you're doing the wrong thing. I can always find something to do, something to perfect. But that being said, when you're doing it yourself, you can generally do it faster. So you're faced with this kind of paradox of, hey, I gave someone a task, they didn't do it right the first time. If I take it over, it's going to take me 20 minutes to do this task. Versus if I sit and I coach with them, it's going to take 40 minutes of my time. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're training someone to take over those things. And so you have to be conscious early on, really not to make those mistakes and say, you know what, screw it, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take it off my own plate, I'm going to do it in 20 minutes and send it back to them because they don't learn. And I found myself in the beginning doing that, and what would happen was we'd be having the same issue time and time again, and then eventually, before you knew it, I spent an hour over the course of the next 2 weeks on the same thing, whereas if I spent the 40 minutes just teaching them behind it, I maybe only had to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes the next time, and ultimately save myself time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's also this piece of that, which is when you give it to them the first time, they come back and did it wrong. You have to own, as the founder,
of course,
or as the manager in the situation, for people who aren't founders, you have to own part of that failure. You clearly didn't provide great instruction, or you haven't hired right. But it's going to be one or the other. There's some level of ownership in that, and which is under your control, that led to that failure.
Yeah. And so actually when I'm hiring new employees and I'm training them, like some of the first tasks I do are total internal tasks. Things that I can just give them, let them run free reign with, see what their thought process is, how they actually ultimately go about creating that execution or that, deliverable piece. And so that way, there's no reflection from the outside perspective from that teaching moment. Yes, we might have wasted time in terms of some resources, might have wasted my own time there, but everyone makes mistakes. And for me, I don't really care about the mistakes that we have made, whether it's on the client side, whether it's internally. I care about learning from those mistakes and not making them a second time. I think that's the most important aspect of it.
Yeah, right. You can't be afraid to fail.
Yes.
But you clearly should not be failing the same way over and over again.
Exactly. Honestly, we probably fail on a daily basis, if not on a weekly basis. With that being said, when we do fail, the one thing that you need to do is take 2 steps forward for every one that you're taking back. Yeah. And that's really where it comes, important from a startup perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned as a founder is going, when you go through that process and you learn something, you have to start making sure you document it, because the team will change.
Yes.
Right, you're going to have some level of natural turnover in the company. I always talk about being a founder of a business. It's like a stop motion video where there's a building and a bunch of people, floating by, and they kind of look like ghosts because they're not, they're quickly moving by. Yeah. And as a founder, you're the building. You're not going anywhere, and people are going to come and go in and out of the organization, but you're always there. Part of that is document as much as you can when these failures happen. So, when you ramp up a new person in that role, that's part of the ramp up, as opposed to watching the same failure happen again, but maybe 2 years apart or 4 years apart.
Yeah. So actually, that's when we talked about, when we were talking about how to coach a sales team, and me and you have done a ton of stuff offline together. And one of the biggest components there is in part of these sales meetings, we have the sales team talk about ultimately some of the struggles that they face, some of the things that they have seen, the ways that they've combated those, and ultimately things that they've learned from it. And the goal, it gets tired after a little while, and what people think are like, we're sharing these lessons internally. What happens is you want your team to be organically teaching each other the lessons. And so the next time that pops up, it's not John who has to teach that lesson. He might have to do all of the heavy lifting on those front end of the component there for the first year, but then the next time his new sales guy steps in, or a sales manager then comes and says, oh yeah, we experienced that issue already, here's the way that it goes. And so you get your team organically teaching it, and that only comes with the documentation in terms of the tactics that you spoke of.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anything keeps you up at night as a founder?
Oh, there's a ton that keeps me up at night. But specifically to the business itself, definitely, they talk about the founder trench, the highs and lows of a founder. I'll have one day where we close 10 clients, and it'll be amazing. And then the next day where there will be 3 different client emergencies, the team's here till the middle of the night. We have a client, in Australia who's doing this. We have a client over in the UK who's here, and then we have one in the United States, and they all have different time-sensitive issues. And so you ride these highs and these lows in terms of your business, and maintaining an even keel through them all is really, I think, one of the things that that I struggle with all the time, is because, you constantly, from an external perspective, it's always clean, easy, smooth, trustworthy. It's calm, collective. But from an internal perspective, you need that for your team too, even though everyone's well aware of what's going on. Even if you're overdrawn, overworked, and these problems that occur on your business, I think is one of the harder things to deal with, because as a founder, you're wearing all these other hats, and those don't go away. I can't just not do my invoicing, my billing. I can't just stop and say, hey, we're not going to do our own marketing, we're not going to do this component. They just get added onto the pile, and prioritizing those, is one of the harder things that I think keeps you up. Yeah. And I think figuring out a system behind that, taking a step back, recuperating, I think that's one of the components there.
Got it. So we have about 5 minutes left, guys, so bear with us for folks on the video. And are there any additional piece of advice you'd want to give the audience? And then maybe at the end of that, I'll swing back to a couple nuggets on sales and marketing that you think people should be aware of.
I think one of the biggest, recommendations that I have is know yourself as a founder, who you ultimately are, who you want to be as a person, and then how you function as a person too. For me, I know that I work extremely hard in very long sprints, but then I get burnt out. And when I start to get in those motions, for me, what I like to do is I'll take a vacation. I'll just go fly somewhere for a week. We'll give the team a week notice. I have to go, I'm going this, decompress completely, and I'll come back and I'll work extremely hard again in that 3-month sprint. For me, it's about every quarter I need to do that in order to, maintain the same work bandwidth. But recognizing those points when you're in a rut and ultimately stepping away, as hard as it seems, especially when you're buried in all that work, it's one of the most rewarding and I think value add pieces you can do as a founder is to get away, reset, and come back with that same vigor, that you started day one with.
And it's about really self-care. And for a lot of people, self-care might mean working out a certain number of days a week or doing yoga, meditation.
100 push-ups in the morning, right?
100 push-ups in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm actually 150 now.
Oh, look at you.
There we go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not just skin and bones here, folks. I'm just a little bit more than that. So, whether it's, morning workouts, meditation, I know works for me, works for a lot of founders. Just understand yourself, being self-aware enough and understand yourself enough to know when you need to do that, when you need to step away, when you need to take personal time. Because if it's easy to always put the business first. It's much more challenging to recognize that if you don't take care of yourself, you don't put yourself first enough, you'll never be able to give your best to the business.
And that relates exactly back to what you said when you talked about, you're the ghost in the building and that building is going nowhere. You are that building. And at the end of the day, when you're the one constant in that, if you're not taking care of yourself, that's everything else is going to fall apart because you are that one constant. And so, as selfish as it seems that sometimes you really have to focus on yourself just as much as you focus on the business because they're doing the same as a founder.
Sales and marketing tips, anything that, a top 3, top 5 things that you'd recommend people need to know about, one or the other or both?
When you do something, commit to it. There's a great way to test the waters and proof of concept, what we call proof campaigns. But ultimately, people get discouraged way too fast in terms of marketing, sales, content creation. If you're going to do something, do it consistently, do it well, focus on those efforts and build upon them. That's what really comes into building a scalable foundation there. And it's not these one-off things where you try. I have way too many companies who say, we tried X, Y, and Z, they didn't work. Well, how long did you try it for? 1 to 2 months. Marketing, it is simple. I actually say, I founded a marketing firm and I tell you that there are no experts in marketing and sales. Marketing and sales are a trial and error process in which the best people get you the best results with the least amount of time and with the highest ROI to you. And so ultimately what that comes down to is learning. We incorporate practices that we learn from working with a co-working space to a healthcare company, all the way down to a SaaS platform. And we rolled those into one and figured out how to implement that on an e-commerce, B2B2C company as well. And so those tactics are something that I wouldn't have had the experience on had we not worked on these 3 different clients, rolled them into one and saw phenomenal results. But that being said, we're not afraid to experiment, we're not afraid to try new things, but we stick with them. When we commit to something, there's rationale and we know what our expected outcome is because it's one big experiment. So I think that's one of the main things, underlying trends. The second is if you're going to do something and you're going to rely on the web, make sure that your website is great, make sure that your SEO is great. All of those things build on each other. And I can tell you so many companies who, I wish I started this a year ago, I wish I started this 2 years ago. And just because you think that you don't have the time, there are easy ways to start slow. For content, for example, you can write one content piece a month and have that up, and ultimately that'll help your SEO rankings, that'll help produce brand awareness components, and slowly but surely you want to get to that 1 a week, 2 a week component there. That's great, you build it up, but you start with something rather than saying we need to do this full scale. You can experiment with those things, but keep it consistent.
Got it. So overall, I think we're probably about out of time, but it feels like a couple of those tips overlap, right? If you're going to try it, commit to it. Don't just, don't expect it to be an obvious one right away. I mean, if it is, right, then either you've gotten lucky or you found gold in your backyard. I don't even know how to phrase it because it's not supposed to be that easy. It's just really not supposed to be that easy. And the second piece is expect there's a comprehensive nature to the web and how you treat it if that's a main channel for your sales, which this day and age it should be.
Absolutely. And the web's an open marketplace when it comes to that stuff. So if it is that easy and you guys are having that results, you got to build defense around it because there are sure as hell going to be someone with the same idea, same way of going about it. And just because it's easy now, people come to me and say, we've had landmark results in doing this. And they come back a year later and they say, we thought it'd always be like this, but we kind of dropped off and we didn't do anything else. So it's evaluating the entire playing field.
Great. Well, Greg Castro, thank you for joining us on Founder Sessions. Nam, thank you for remaining behind the camera. Your silence is golden, and we look forward to having you guys tune in again next week.